I'm Beatrix Calloway. I'm 52 years old, and I came up through the Marine Corps the long way, from a private standing a gate in the fog to a brigadier general. For 34 years, I gave that corps everything I had, and I carried one lesson from the first morning I put on the uniform. You verify, you never assume. But when I came home to the base that made me and a young Marine tore up my pass and dropped it in the trash, I had to decide what kind of leader all those years had actually built. Have you ever been dismissed or turned away by the very place you gave your life to? If so, tell me your story in the comments. You are not alone. Before I get into what happened, let me know where you're tuning in from. And if you've ever had to hold on to your dignity when someone tried to take it, hit that like button and subscribe. It was the summer of 1992, and the first thing the Marine Corps ever taught me happened at a gate, 0500 at Quantico, the fog still sitting low over the Potomac, and I was 18 years old, and so new that my camis still had the fold lines pressed into them from the plastic. Private Calloway, Security Battalion, reporting for my first gate rotation. I remember standing at that checkpoint, watching headlights come out of the dark and thinking the whole base was a fortress and I was the wall. I had never in my life felt so important and so unqualified at the same time. The man who ran that gate was a master gunnery sergeant named Ozzie Kerrigan. He was 34 then, which felt ancient to me, and he had a way of standing perfectly still that made everyone around him move a little straighter. He did not yell. I had come to the Corps expecting to be yelled at, and instead I got Kerrigan, who spoke quietly and made you lean in, which turned out to be far more terrifying. That first morning, he stood beside me while I fumbled a clipboard and a flashlight and a stack of visitor passes I did not yet know how to read. A sedan pulled up. The driver, a civilian contractor, handed over a pass, and I stared at it like it was written in another language. You verify, Calloway, Kerrigan said. You never assume. Assuming is how you turn away the wrong person, and it is how you salute the wrong one. I have carried that sentence for 34 years. I did not know that morning how completely my life would bend around it. Kerrigan taught me that the gate was the one place on the entire base where a Marine's whole character had to fit inside 30 seconds. Everywhere else you had time. You had context, you had a chain of command down the hall, you had the luxury of a second look. At the gate, you had a person in a car, a document in your hand, and the clock. What you did in those 30 seconds told everyone exactly who you were. The gate is the first face of the base, he told me once, and it is the last line of it. People decide what they think of the whole Marine Corps by how you treat them right here, before they are even through. So you treat them like a Marine treats a person. You check, you are polite, and you never, ever let a broken machine or a bad mood make the decision for you. I loved it. I know that sounds strange, that a teenager could fall in love with standing in the cold checking identification, but I did. There was something clean about it. A person came to you. You verified who they were. You either let them into the place you were sworn to protect, or you did not, and either way, you did it with respect. It was the Marine Corps distilled down to its smallest honest unit. By 1995, I was a sergeant, and it was my turn to stand beside the nervous new privates and watch them fumble the clipboard. I caught myself more than once saying Kerrigan's exact words in Kerrigan's exact cadence. You verify. You never assume. I would hear it come out of my own mouth and feel him standing behind me even when he was 3 buildings away. There was a morning that year I've never forgotten. A young private I was training got an error on a pass. This was before the scanners, when a bad pass just meant a smudged stamp or a date you had to squint at. He wanted to turn the driver away. It was easier. Turning someone away is always easier than verifying them, because verifying takes effort and turning away takes none. I stopped him. I picked up the phone, called the office that issued the pass, confirmed the driver in about 45 seconds, and waved the man through with an apology for the wait. The private asked me why I bothered. The line was long. Nobody would have known. I would have known, I told him, and so would he. I nodded at the driver pulling away. He's going to remember whether the Marine at the gate treated him like a problem or like a person. That is the only thing he is going to remember about us. In 1996, Kerrigan pulled me aside and told me to apply for the Marine Enlisted Commissioning Education Program. I told him no. I told him I was an enlisted Marine, that the gate was my world, that I did not want to trade it for an officer's desk. He looked at me with that stillness of his. "The Corps has plenty of officers who have never stood a gate in their lives," he said. "What it needs is officers who remember exactly what the gate feels like from the wrong side of it." "You are going to be a general someday, Calloway. And when you are, I want you to still know how 30 seconds feels to the person in the car." I laughed at him. General. I was a 22-year-old sergeant. But he was not laughing, and in the end, I did what he told me to do, because I always did what he told me to do. I left the gate for the last time as an enlisted Marine on a gray afternoon that fall. I shook his hand. I promised him I would never forget what the gate had taught me. He told me he would hold me to it. There was a winter that taught me the rest of it. A retiree came through the gate one January night, an old man in a car that was more rust than paint, and his identification had lapsed, and the rule said, "Turn him away." I did not turn him away. I called the office. I verified that he was who he said he was, a Marine who had bled in places I had only read about, and I walked him through myself, and I apologized for the cold and the wait. Kerrigan watched the whole thing from the shack. When I came back, he did not say good job. He was not a good job kind of man. He said, "That man will not remember your name, Calloway, but he will remember that a Marine treated him like he still mattered." That is the entire job. Everything else is paperwork. I gave that gate everything I had in those years. I traded sleep for it. I traded the easy social life the other young Marines had for it. I volunteered for the rotations nobody wanted, because I could not get enough of the thing itself, the small daily test of whether I would be the kind of Marine who checks or the kind who assumes. I did not know I was building anything. I thought I was just standing a post. But a person becomes what they practice, and I was practicing 30 seconds at a time, the exact instinct that would end up defining the rest of my life. The gate was giving me far more than I was giving it. I just could not see it yet. I had no idea that 34 years later, the Marine Corps would hold me to it too, at the same gate, in a way I could never have imagined. The fog is gone now. It is present day, and I am 52 years old, and I am a brigadier general in the United States Marine Corps. I still have trouble writing that sentence. Somewhere inside me there is an 18-year-old private who thinks a general is a kind of weather, something enormous and remote that happens to you. I came up the long way from the ranks, and the whole journey took 34 years, and at the end of it, the Marine Corps sent me back to where it started. I had been selected as the incoming Deputy Commanding General at Training and Education Command, which is headquartered at Quantico. There was also going to be a recognition ceremony, the kind the Corps does when someone from the enlisted ranks reaches flag rank, a quiet acknowledgement that the path I walked is still open to the next kid fumbling a clipboard in the fog. I should have been nothing but happy. Coming home to Quantico as a general is the kind of thing that only happens in the stories old Marines tell each other. But 2 days before I arrived, my aide handed me a stack of in-brief material, and one line in it snagged on something. Captain Noelle Aldridge is 34, sharp and constitutionally incapable of letting a detail slide. She had flagged a section about the base's visitor access. "There have been complaints, ma'am," she said. "Visitor pass system, the credential scanners at the gates have been erroring out for months. Contractors, families, retirees, people getting turned away with valid passes because the machine cannot read them. There's a whole file of tickets. What is the fix? That is the thing. The tickets keep getting closed without one. Somebody keeps marking them as user error." She frowned. "A lot of user error for one broken machine." I filed it away. It was not my base to run. The base commander had his own chain, and a new deputy commanding general who shows up and starts inspecting gates before she is even in processed is a deputy commanding general nobody wants. So I let it sit. I have thought about that a great deal since. I let it sit because it was easier, and easier is always the beginning of the problem. Inside the provost marshal's office at Quantico, the man responsible for that broken machine was having a conversation I would not learn about until later. Major Dale Sturgis is 41, the provost operations officer, and by every account he had once been a decent Marine who had somewhere along the way stopped caring in the specific way that people stop caring, which is to say, quietly and with excellent paperwork. A clerk brought him the latest stack of past complaints. Sturgis did not read them. He told the clerk what he always told the clerk, that the machine was fine and the problem was people. That if visitors could follow simple instructions, the gates would run clean. He signed off on closing the tickets. He went to lunch. The morning I arrived, the day watch at the main gate fell to 2 Marines who could not have been more different. Lance Corporal Cody Merrick is 22. He is the kind of young Marine who is so afraid of doing the wrong thing that he has made a fortress out of the rules, because rules feel safe. Because if you follow the rule exactly, then whatever happens is not your fault. He had been chewed out twice in his short career for letting people through he should not have. And he had decided, the way frightened young people decide things, that he would never again be the one who let the wrong person in. He would rather turn 100 right people away than admit one wrong one. He did not yet understand that this is its own kind of failure. Beside him was Private First Class Tess Lindquist, 20 years old, greener than Merrick by a year and a rank, but with something Merrick had misplaced. She was kind by instinct. When a family got turned around at the gate, she felt it, in her stomach, the way you are supposed to feel it. She had not yet learned to armor that over. I have come to believe the whole story turned, in some small way, on the difference between those 2 young Marines. That morning, the scanner threw its 3rd error of the hour. Merrick smacked the side of it, the way people hit machines as if violence were a diagnostic. Lindquist suggested quietly that maybe they should call the pass office and verify people by hand until it was fixed. Merrick told her that was not the procedure. The procedure was, the pass scans, or it does not. And I, a mile away, made a decision that put me directly in front of that scanner. I told my aide I wanted to drive to the gate alone, in civilian clothes, ahead of her, ahead of the official arrival. I wanted to come back to Quantico the way I first came to it, as a nobody in an ordinary car, so I could see the place with plain eyes before it dressed itself up for the general. I wanted, I think, to feel 18 again for about 10 minutes. I have thought a great deal since about how many small failures had to line up to produce one torn pass. It is never one thing. It is a scanner nobody replaced, and a work order nobody resubmitted, and a stack of complaints somebody found it easier to close than to read, and a watch commander who had decided that the people at the gate were the problem, and a frightened young Marine who had learned that following the rule to the letter was the only way to stay safe. Every one of those was a person choosing the easy thing over the correct thing, quietly, with good paperwork, over months. That is how institutions rot. Not in one dramatic collapse, but in 1,000 small surrenders that each, individually, seem reasonable. Captain Aldridge had wanted to send my arrival details ahead, the way you do for a general, so the gate would know to expect me. I told her not to. She thought I was being humble. I was not being humble. I wanted to see the base honestly, and you cannot see a thing honestly once it has been warned you're coming. A gate that knows a general is arriving is on its best behavior. I wanted the ordinary behavior. The Tuesday morning behavior. The behavior a retiree or a contractor's spouse or a nervous new lieutenant's mother would actually meet. I got it. I want to be fair to myself about that, at least. Whatever else I did wrong by letting that complaint file sit on my desk for 2 days, I did insist on seeing the truth, and the truth is exactly what I saw. I got exactly what I asked for, and a great deal more. I turned off the highway and the gate came up out of the trees, and my chest did something complicated. 34 years, the guard shack was new, the barriers were heavier, the signage had changed, but it was the same gate. My gate. I had guarded this ground before either of the Marines standing at it had been born. I had a visitor pass on the seat beside me. The office had issued it the day before, for my early arrival, before the official in-processing. I picked it up, rolled down the window, and pulled up to the checkpoint, and for one warm second I was a private again, coming home. Lance Corporal Merrick took the pass without really looking at me. He ran it under the scanner. The scanner made the flat, unhappy sound I would come to know well. He ran it again. Same sound. "Your pass is expired, ma'am," he said. "Step aside." "It was issued yesterday," I said. I kept my voice easy. "It should be current through the end of the week. The scanner has been having trouble reading them. Would you check it against the duty log or call the pass office? I can wait." I want to be clear about something. I was not testing him. I was not lying in wait to catch a young Marine in a mistake. I genuinely thought I was helping. I knew, from a lifetime at Gates, exactly how few seconds it takes to verify a person by hand. 45 seconds. I had done it 1,000 times. I was handing him the easy solution. He keyed his radio instead. "Post 1 to watch commander. I have a visitor, expired pass. Scanner will not read it. Requesting guidance." The radio crackled, and a voice came back annoyed before it even finished a sentence. That was Major Sturgis, though I did not know his name yet. Post 1. Do not hold the line for one visitor. If the pass will not scan, it is not valid. Move her along and keep it moving. He never asked my name. He never asked for the pass number. He did not send anyone to verify. He heard the word visitor, and the word expired, and he was already done, from wherever he was sitting, warm, with his coffee. I heard the whole thing, and something in me, the part that had stood at this exact gate at 18, went very quiet and very cold, not with anger, with recognition. I knew that voice, not the man, the choice. It was the choice to let a broken machine and a bad mood make the decision, the exact thing Kerrigan had spent a year drilling out of me. Merrick lowered the radio. He had his guidance now, his fortress of the rule, and he did the thing I still find hard to describe because it was so small and so total. He took my pass in both hands and tore it in half. Then he dropped the 2 pieces in the bin beside the shack. No pass, no entry, he said. Behind him, Private First Class Lindqvist made a small movement, half a step forward, her mouth opening. She had felt it, the wrongness in her stomach the way you are supposed to. But she was 20, and he outranked her, and the watch commander had already spoken, and so she stopped and said nothing, and I watched her swallow it. I did not hold that against her. I have been 20. I know exactly how heavy that half step is. I looked at the young man who had just torn up my pass. I was not going to pull rank. I want you to understand that this was not restraint in the sense of me holding back some great fury. There was no fury. There was only the clear, cold knowledge that I had guarded this gate before he was alive, and that I knew precisely how many seconds it takes to verify a person, and that he had chosen, or been told to choose, not to spend them. I understand, I said. Would you give me the duty log, please, and the name of the watch commander who gave you that guidance on the radio? It was not a threat. It was a question a person asks when they intend to fix something rather than win something. But Merrick heard the temperature in it, because young Marines can hear temperature even when they cannot yet read it. And for the first time he actually looked at me. Looked at my face. Something crossed his own, a flicker of doubt, the beginning of a suspicion that the 30 seconds he had just spent were going to matter more than he thought. I have been asked since why I did not simply tell him who I was. It is a fair question. I could have ended the whole thing with one sentence. I am Brigadier General Calloway, your incoming Deputy Commanding General, and you will call your watch commander back and tell him to verify me. It would have worked. The pass would have come back out of the bin, the barrier would have lifted, and I would have driven onto the base with a young Marine stammering apologies behind me. I did not do it, and the reason matters. If I had pulled rank, the lesson at that gate would have been that the rule bends for stars, that a general gets verified and a nobody gets turned away. But that was precisely the disease I was standing in front of. The gate was already treating people by their apparent importance instead of their actual identity, and me announcing my rank to jump the line would only have confirmed the very thing that was broken. The retiree in the rusted car did not have a star to flash. The contractor's spouse did not. The 340 people the gate turned away that year did not. If the only fix available to me was one that required being a general, then it was no fix at all, and I would have learned nothing about how the gate actually treated the people it was built to serve. So I stood there as a woman in an ordinary car with a torn pass, and I asked politely for the duty log and the name of the watch commander. Not as a general. As a citizen, the gate had failed. I wanted to feel the exact weight of it, the helplessness of being right and having no way to prove it to someone who had decided not to check. I felt it. It is a heavier thing than I remembered, and I had guarded that gate. I thought about every person who had felt that same weight that year without a lifetime at gates to steady them. And I understood standing there that my anger was not really about my pass at all. That was when a staff car braked short of the checkpoint just behind the line and a door opened. The man who got out of the staff car was Colonel Errol Haywood, and he was the commander of Marine Corps Base Quantico. He is 50, silver at the temples, unhurried in the way that men who run large things are unhurried. He had come down to the gate that morning for reasons of his own, some routine visit, and he had not expected to find anything at all. He saw my face and he stopped walking. I watched it happen on him, the recognition, then the disbelief, then the arithmetic of a career officer, realizing exactly what he is looking at and exactly what has just occurred in front of it. His eyes went from my face to the young lance corporal, to the bin beside the shack where 2 halves of a torn visitor pass were sitting on top of the trash. Colonel Haywood walked to that bin. He reached in, He lifted out the 2 pieces of my pass, and he held them together, and he read them, and then he straightened up to his full height, and he looked at me, and he brought his hand up in a salute. "General Calloway," he said. "Welcome home, ma'am." I have replayed the next 2 seconds many times. The gate went silent. Lance Corporal Merrick's face did something I can only describe as falling, all the young certainty draining out of it at once, and his hand, the hand that had torn the pass, started to shake. Private First Class Lindqvist had gone completely still. Somewhere down the line, an engine idled. And the 2 words the colonel had used, "welcome home," hung in the air over a torn pass in a trash bin. I want to describe what a gate sounds like when it goes silent, because most people have never heard it. A gate is never quiet. There's the idle of engines, the crackle of a radio, the shuffle of boots on concrete, the small constant business of a place people pass through. When Colonel Haywood saluted, all of that stopped at once, the way a room stops when a glass breaks, and into that silence came the single plain fact that the woman whose pass had just been torn in half and thrown away was a general officer of the United States Marine Corps. I have commanded in loud places and quiet ones, and I can tell you that the loudest silence I have ever stood inside was the one at that gate, with a young man's shaking hand and an old salute holding still in the morning air. I returned his salute. "Colonel, stand easy." I said it quietly, and I said the next part more quietly still, only for him. "Please do not make a scene of this at the gate. There are cars behind me and 2 young Marines standing a post, and this is not the place." He understood. He is a good officer, and a good officer knows the difference between correcting something and performing the correction. He gave the smallest nod. I looked at Lance Corporal Merrick then. I made myself look at him properly, this 22-year-old who had just handed me the worst 30 seconds of his short career. I know what he expected. He expected to be destroyed. He expected the general whose pass he had torn to open him up right there at the gate, in front of Lindqvist, in front of the colonel, in front of God and the morning traffic. It would have been easy. It would have been, in the smallest way, satisfying. I did not do it. And I want to tell you honestly that it was not because I am a saint. It was because of the way Kerrigan had once looked at me, 30 years earlier, on a morning when I had assumed instead of verified, and it had cost someone their afternoon. He had not destroyed me either. He had looked at me with a kind of patient disappointment that taught me more than any dressing down ever could, because it left room for me to become better instead of just smaller. I looked at Merrick the way Kerrigan had looked at me. I did not say anything. I did not need to. His hand was already shaking. My aide arrived then, Captain Aldridge, having driven up behind, and she took in the scene in about 1 second, and her face went hard with the particular fury of a good aide who has just discovered someone mistreated her general. She started toward the shack, toward Merrick, and I stopped her with 2 words. "Captain, no." She looked at me like I had lost my mind. Later in the car, she would ask me why. She would say, "Ma'am, he tore up your credentials and threw them in the trash, and a major told him to do it, and you are going to let it go." She was not wrong to be angry. Her anger was loyalty, and I would not trade an aide who felt that for 100 who did not. But that night, alone, with the 2 halves of the past sitting on my desk where I had fished them back out and kept them, I thought it through the way you have to think a thing through before you act on it. And I realized the boy had done wrong. Yes, he had torn a pass he should have verified. But the boy had also been handed a machine that did not work, a watch commander who told him over the radio not to think, and a whole chain that had spent months marking real problems as user error. If I ended his career at that gate, I would be doing the exact thing the system had done to every visitor it turned away. I would be letting the easy, satisfying decision stand in for the correct, difficult one. The easy thing, I wrote in my notebook that night, was to end a 22-year-old's career at a gate. The right thing is harder and much less satisfying, and it is not about him at all. I sat with the 2 halves of that pass for a long while. My aide would have framed the whole incident as an outrage, and she would not have been wrong exactly. Outrage is a clean and simple emotion, and there is a place for it. But outrage is also lazy. It points at the nearest person and calls the problem solved. The nearest person, that morning, was a 22-year-old Lance Corporal, and if I let my outrage aim there, it would land on him and stop, satisfied, and the actual machinery that produced him would keep running, untouched. I thought about who I had been at 22. I had been a sergeant by then, which is a different thing than a lance corporal, but I had been just as capable of a small cruelty when I was tired and afraid, and someone above me had told me not to think. The difference between me and Merrick was not virtue. It was Kerrigan. I had been handed a leader who taught me to verify. Merrick had been handed a watch commander who taught him to assume. Put me under Sturgis at 22, and I am not certain I would have done better than the boy at the gate. That thought kept me honest. It is easy to be merciful to someone once you can see yourself standing exactly where they are standing. And so the anger cooled into something more useful, which was resolve. Not to punish, but to fix. The pass in 2 pieces on my desk was evidence. And evidence is not a thing you avenge. It is a thing you act on. I looked at the torn pass a long time, and I decided that the pass, not the private, was the thing to fix. The next morning I put on my uniform and I went to work, and I did the thing that is much slower and much less dramatic than a confrontation at a gate. I started pulling records. I asked for the credential system trouble tickets going back 6 months. I asked for the gate duty logs over the same period. I asked the base, G6, the communications shop, for the maintenance history on the scanners. I did not raise my voice at anyone. I did not need to. Records do not shake or make excuses. They simply say what happened. What they said was damning. The scanners had been failing for the better part of a year. There were hundreds of error events logged. There were complaint tickets, dozens and dozens of them, from contractors and retirees and family members and even active duty Marines, all describing the same thing: a valid pass that would not read, a person turned away. And nearly every one of those tickets had been closed with the same disposition. User error, no action required. Signed off at the watch commander level. Signed again and again by Major Dale Sturgis. It is a strange feeling reading a year of small cruelties in a spreadsheet. None of them were dramatic, nobody was struck. But every one of those closed tickets was a person who had come to the first face of the base and been treated like a problem instead of verified like a person. And every one of them had walked away deciding something about the Marine Corps. Kerrigan's voice was in my head the whole time I read. People decide what they think of the whole Corps by how you treat them right here. Major Sturgis requested a meeting with me before I requested one with him. That told me something. He had learned, the way things travel on a base, that the general whose pass got torn at the gate had been on the radio net, had heard the guidance the watch commander gave. He came to my office smooth and apologetic, a man who had managed his way out of trouble before and expected to do it again. He was sorry, he said, for the misunderstanding at the gate. He wanted me to know that the lance corporal was young and inexperienced, that he would personally see the matter addressed, that of course had anyone realized who I was, it never would have happened. I let him talk. I have learned that letting a person talk is often the most useful thing you can do, because they will tell you exactly who they are if you give them enough quiet. And Sturgis told me. He built his whole apology on the frame that the problem was the private's inexperience, that if the young man had simply used better judgment, none of this would have occurred. He did use judgment, Major, I said when he was finished. Yours. I opened the folder on my desk. Here's the transcript of the gate net from that morning with the timestamp. Post 1 requests guidance. He tells the watch commander the scanner will not read the pass and asks what to do. And the watch commander says, and I am reading it exactly, do not hold the line for one visitor. If the pass will not scan, it is not valid. Move her along. The smoothness went out of the room. He asked for verification, I said. He asked the right question, and you told him not to bother. So please do not come into my office and tell me a 22-year-old lacked judgment, when the judgment he was denied was the judgment you were sitting there refusing to provide. Over coffee, from a warm room. He tried once more to find the frame that would save him. He started to say that if the private had used judgment. I did not let him finish it a second time. I told him what would happen next, in plain terms. There would be a full review of the credential system failure and of how the complaint tickets had been dispositioned for the past year. There would be a separate review of how the gate watch had been run. And until the system failure was documented, no adverse action of any kind would land on Lance Corporal Merrick, because I would not permit a young Marine to be made the scapegoat for a failure that had been signed for, over and over, above his pay grade. He asked me at the end whether there was anything he could do to make it right. It is a question that sounds like accountability, and is almost always its opposite. What he meant was, is there a version of this where I keep my post? I told him the truth, which was that making it right was no longer in his hands. It had passed into the hands of the record, and the record would say what it said. That is the thing about closing 340 tickets as user error. Each signature feels weightless in the moment, a small administrative shrug. But they accumulate on a page, and one day, someone reads the whole page at once. And the weightless things turn out to have weighed a great deal. Captain Aldridge sat in on the second half of that meeting, and afterward she said something I have kept. She said, "Ma'am, I wanted you to crush the Lance Corporal, and instead you are dismantling the Major, and I do not understand why that is more satisfying, but it is." I told her it was more satisfying because it was more true. The Lance Corporal tore one pass on one morning. The Major had been tearing them by proxy 340 times from a warm room for a year. Aim your correction at the true size of the wrong, I told her, not at the nearest face. I did not enjoy any of it. People imagine that exposing a careless man must feel like victory. It does not. It feels like watching a slow, avoidable accident finally reach the wall it was always going to reach. I felt the flatness of prevention arriving 11 months too late, the same flatness I would feel later reading his relief in a memo. 340 people had already been turned away. Nothing I did could give a single one of them that morning back. All I could do was make sure the 341st person, whoever they turned out to be, drove through. Sturgis left my office a different man than the one who had walked in. He had come in believing the story was about an embarrassing gate incident that could be smoothed over with an apology and a sacrificed private. He left understanding that the story was about a year of his own signatures, and that the person reading them had guarded that gate before he had earned his own commission. The reviews did what reviews do when the record is clear, they took time and they were unglamorous. And at the end of them, the truth was simply written down where it could not be argued with. The credential system had been failing for 11 months. The scanners were an out-of-date model that the manufacturer had stopped fully supporting, and a work order to replace them had been submitted and denied and never resubmitted. The complaint tickets, 340 of them over the year, had been closed as user error without investigation in all but a handful of cases, and the pattern of those closures led, cleanly and without any help from me, straight to the watch commander's desk. Major Sturgis was relieved of his post as watch commander, not for the incident at my gate, though that is how people would tell the story later. He was relieved for the year behind it, for the 340 people he had waved off with a signature, for running the first face of the base as if the people arriving at it were a nuisance to be managed rather than a duty to be met. I did not attend anything. There was no scene, no confrontation, no moment where I stood over him. I read the outcome in a memo, the way he had disposed of all those tickets in memos, and I felt no triumph. I felt the particular flatness of watching a preventable thing finally get prevented 11 months too late. Lance Corporal Merrick was a different matter, and I thought about him more than I thought about Sturgis. He was brought in to be counseled, and I know from Aldridge, who knew from the provost marshal, that he walked in expecting the end of his career. He had spent the days since the gate, certain that he was finished, that the general would take her time and then take his stripes, that the shaking hand at the gate had been the last good moment of his short service. He came in, braced for it. And instead he was told the truth, which is a harder and better thing than punishment. He was told, plainly, that he had been wrong to tear that pass. That the rule is never the whole of the job. That a Marine at a gate has a duty to verify a person and not merely to feed a document into a machine, and that tearing up someone's credentials and throwing them in the trash is beneath the uniform, no matter what the scanner says. He was not allowed to pretend it had been fine, but he was also told the other truth, that he had been failed, that he had asked the right question, asked for verification, and been told by his own watch commander not to bother, that a good Marine had been put in a bad position by a broken machine and a careless superior, and that the Corps understood the difference between a young man's mistake and a leader's negligence. He was not destroyed. He was corrected, retrained, and put back on the gate under a process that would not set him up to fail again. I heard that he wept a little when he understood he was being kept. Not out of relief for his career, or not only that, out of something more like being seen. He had braced for cruelty and been handed accountability instead, and at 22, he did not yet have a category for the difference. He would spend the rest of his service learning it. I know because I had wept the same way at about the same age, on a gray afternoon when Kerrigan chose to teach me instead of break me. I want to say something about accountability, because it is a word people use as a synonym for punishment, and it is not one. Punishment is about making someone suffer in proportion to what they did. Accountability is about making someone understand what they did, and then giving them the chance to carry that understanding forward into a better version of themselves. The two look similar from a distance. Up close, they are opposites. Punishment closes a door. Accountability holds one open and expects you to walk through it, changed. Sturgis received punishment, in a sense, though I would call it consequence. He lost his post because he had demonstrated over a year and 340 signatures that he could not be trusted with the first face of the base. That is not cruelty. That is the institution declining to keep handing responsibility to a man who had shown again and again that he would not honor it. He was not thrown out of the Corps. He was moved to where he could do less harm, and the record of why followed him as it should. Merrick received accountability. He was made to understand, without softening, that tearing a person's credentials and throwing them in the trash is beneath the uniform. Full stop, regardless of what the scanner says or what the watch commander orders. He was not permitted the comfort of pretending it had been fine or that he had merely followed orders. And then, having been made to carry that fully, he was handed the open door. Retraining, a corrected process, his post back. The chance to be, next time, the Marine who verifies. He was 22. He had a whole career in front of him in which to prove that the worst morning of it had also been the morning he learned the most. I have known many Marines whose finest service grew directly out of their worst mistake. It is one of the quiet mercies of a long career that a bad 30 seconds does not have to be the whole story. Private First Class Lindqvist, who had taken that half step forward and swallowed it, was quietly noted in the review as having shown the right instinct. Nobody made a ceremony of it, but her name went into the record on the correct side of the line, and when the time came for meritorious consideration, that record would be there. The Corps does not always reward the person who felt the wrongness in their stomach and almost spoke. This time, in a small way, it did. Correcting a wrong is not the same as fixing the thing that produced it. Relieving Sturgis addressed the past. It did nothing for the next visitor who would drive up to a scanner that still did not work. If I had stopped there, I would have won an argument and changed nothing, and in a year there would be another Sturgis and another Merrick and another torn pass, because the machine would still be broken and the process would still default to denial. So I did the slow, permanent thing. I built the fix into the institution so that it would outlive me, which is the only kind of fix that counts. I worked with the Provost Marshal and the Base G6 to replace the failing scanners, this time with a resubmitted and approved work order that I personally made sure did not vanish into a queue. New equipment, properly supported. But equipment was the smaller half. The larger half was the process, and the process is what I cared about, because equipment fails eventually no matter how new it is, and when it does, the only thing standing between a valid visitor and a torn pass is the rule that tells the Marine at the gate what to do. So we rewrote the Visitor Verification Standard Operating Procedure. The old procedure, the one Merrick had followed to the letter, defaulted to denial. Pass will not scan, visitor does not enter. The new procedure defaulted to verification. Any scanner error would now route automatically to the duty officer for a manual check against the visitor log, and the visitor would be verified by hand exactly the way I had verified a contractor in 45 seconds in 1995. Denial by default was gone, verification by default took its place. A broken machine could no longer make the decision. A person had to. I did not invent that standard. I want to be honest about that. I took it, word for word in spirit, from a master gunnery sergeant who had drilled it into a frightened 18-year-old at that same gate in 1992. You verify. You never assume. I had simply spent 34 years carrying it, and now I wrote it down where a sentry would never again have to guess. I had one conversation with Lance Corporal Merrick during all of this. Just one, and it was short. He was back on the gate, and I stopped on my way through, in uniform this time, and he came to attention so fast I thought he might hurt himself. I told him to stand easy. The machine will fail again someday, I told him. New scanners, old scanners, it does not matter. Someday one of them is going to throw an error while a valid person sits in front of you. When that day comes, you verify. You never assume, because assuming is how you turn away the wrong person, and it is how you salute the wrong one. He recognized, I think, that he was being handed something rather than punished, that the words were not a reprimand but an inheritance, the same sentence that had been handed to me at 18 at this exact spot. He said, "Yes, ma'am," and I could hear that he meant it in the way you only mean things after they have cost you something. There is a temptation, when you fix something, to make the fix about yourself, to attach your name to the new procedure, to let it be known that the general said it right, to collect the small currency of credit. I worked hard to keep my name off of it. The new standard operating procedure does not say Callaway anywhere in it. It does not need to. A good process is one that works whether or not anyone remembers who wrote it. And the moment a fix depends on the reputation of the person who made it, it has already started to fail. Because reputations move on, and gates do not. What I wanted was a procedure so plain and so automatic that the most frightened, rule-bound, exhausted young Marine on the worst morning of their watch could not get it wrong. That was the whole design goal. Not to require good judgment, which is rare and fails under pressure, but to make the good outcome the default, so that a Marine would have to actively work to reach the bad one. The old procedure made denial the path of least resistance. The new one made verification the path of least resistance. That single inversion, error routes to verification instead of to denial, was worth more than any speech I could give or any example I could make of any private. Systems beat sermons, they always have. I also made sure the new equipment was not a one-time gesture. A work order to replace failing gear is easy to approve once and then forget, and then 5 years pass, and the new gear is the old gear, and no one has budgeted for the next replacement. I built the refresh cycle into the plan so that the scanners would be maintained and replaced on a schedule instead of run until they failed and then blamed on the people standing in front of them. Prevention is boring. It does not make a good story. It is also the entire job. Before I left the subject entirely, I did one more thing for myself. I went to the base archive and I asked them to pull the old Gatewatch rosters from the early 1990s. It took a while, but there it was, on a brittle page, the name Kerrigan, Master Gunnery Sergeant, Security Battalion, and right below it in the same duty section, Callaway. And I put my hand flat on that page and stood there a long moment. The lesson she was given at 18 had just become base policy at 52. The old man was real, and he was remembered, and so it turned out was the private beneath his name. Weeks went by. The base did what bases do, which is absorb a change until the change becomes simply the way things are. The new scanners went in. The new procedure went into effect. And the extraordinary thing about a good fix is how quickly it becomes invisible. One afternoon near the end of the duty day, I found myself parked across from the main gate for no official reason at all. I told myself I was waiting for a call. Really, I was watching. And while I watched, a scanner threw an error. I saw it happen, the flat, unhappy sound I would know anywhere. A family in a minivan, a pass that would not read. And the young Marine at the gate, not Merrick, someone I did not know, did not tear anything. He held up a polite hand, asked the family to wait one moment, keyed his radio, and verified them through the duty officer. 45 seconds. Then he waved them through with a smile and an apology for the delay. The minivan pulled onto the base, and the family inside would drive away someday, deciding that the Marine Corps had treated them like people. I sat in my car, and I am not ashamed to tell you that my eyes stung. It was the smallest thing. A family waved through a gate. But it was the whole of it, the entire point of 34 years, playing out at the first face of the base exactly the way an old master gunnery sergeant had said it should. There was more. Aldridge came to me a few days later with news that undid me a little. Master Gunnery Sergeant Ozzie Kerrigan was alive. He was 68, retired, living not 40 minutes from the base. Someone in my office had gone looking, on their own initiative, and found him, and he had been invited to the recognition ceremony. He had said yes. I sat with that for a while. The man who told me, at 22, that I would be a general someday, was going to be in the seats when the Marine Corps made it official. I had spent 34 years half believing he had just been being kind. He had not been being kind. He had been verifying, the way he taught me, seeing exactly what was in front of him and refusing to assume it was less. Aldridge, who had never fully forgiven me for stopping her at the gate, asked me one more time, gently now, whether I ever regretted not making an example of the private, whether it would not have been more satisfying, more just, to open him up on the spot. The example I wanted to set, I told her, was never about the private. If I had destroyed him, the lesson would have been that rank protects you and lack of rank exposes you, which is exactly the lesson that broken system was already teaching 340 people a year. The example I wanted to set was that we fix the gate, not the scapegoat. He learned it, so did everyone watching. That is worth 100 times more than the 10 seconds it would have felt good to ruin him. I keep returning in my mind to that minivan. A family I never met, a scanner error I happened to witness, a young Marine I did not know, handling it exactly right. None of them will ever know I was watching. None of them will ever know that there was a morning, weeks earlier, when the same error would have ended in a torn past and a family turned away with a child in the back seat, wondering why. They drove onto the base, annoyed by a 45-second delay and nothing more. And they will never understand that the 45-second delay was the whole victory. The entire point, the reason any of it was worth doing. The best fixes are invisible to the people they protect. That is not a tragedy. That is the definition of a fix that worked. Aldridge told me around this time that word had gotten around the base about what had happened and that the version being told was surprisingly close to the truth, which almost never happens. Marines are storytellers and stories drift, but this one had held its shape. The general got turned away at the gate, and instead of ending the private, she fixed the gate. Young Marines were repeating it to each other. I found that I did not mind the story being told, as long as it was told correctly, because the lesson inside it was the one Kerrigan had put inside me, and a lesson only survives if it gets retold. I had spent 34 years being the story that old man told. Now, apparently, I was becoming a story too. I only hoped I was worthy of the version going around. I stood at the gate at dusk that evening, in the fading light, the way I had stood at it at 0500 in 1992, and I understood something I had not been able to see while I was angry. The gate had not failed me. My gate, my sacred ground, the first face of the base. It had not turned on me. A broken machine had failed, and a careless man had failed, and both of those were now fixed. The place itself was exactly what it had always been. It had just been waiting, patiently, for someone who remembered what it was for to come home and set it right. The recognition ceremony was held in one of the older halls on the base, the kind with good wood and older flags, and I wore my Marine Corps dress blues with the single star of a brigadier general on each shoulder. I will tell you that putting on those dress blues, in that building, 34 years after I first pulled on camis, still creased from the plastic, was the closest I have come to feeling my whole life stand in one place at one time. Lieutenant General Sam Ordway, the commanding general of Training and Education Command, presided. He is 58, a good and serious man, and he said generous things, and I heard about half of them because I was looking at the seats. Because in the seats near the back, in a coat that no longer fit him quite the way it used to, sat Master Gunnery Sergeant Ozzie Kerrigan, 68 years old, still in the way he had always been still, so that the people around him sat a little straighter without knowing why. Our eyes met across that hall, and 34 years folded shut like a book. Afterward, he found me, or I found him, the crowd doing that thing crowds do, where it dissolves and leaves the two people who need to be alone, standing in a small, quiet island of their own. He took my hand in both of his, the way he had shaken it on that gray afternoon in 1996. I heard what happened at the gate, he said. The pass, and I heard what you did about it. You did not break the boy. You fixed the gate. He nodded slowly, and his eyes were bright. You remembered. You made it kind of hard to forget, I said, and my voice was not entirely steady. That was the idea, he said. We did not say much more. We did not need to. Some debts are paid in a single sentence spoken across a good wooden floor. I have thought since about what it was exactly that he had given me. It was not confidence, though I gained that. It was not ambition, though I found some. What he gave me was a standard I could not put down, a small hard sentence that lived in my chest and measured everything I did against it for 34 years. You verify. You never assume. It is a strange gift, a standard, because it feels less like a present and more like a weight, and it is only decades later, when you see what you have become because you carried it, that you understand it was the most generous thing anyone ever handed you. He did not tell me I was special. He told me to check my work and treat people like people. And then he trusted me to spend a lifetime finding out how far that could take a person who came up from nothing at a gate in the fog. On my way out of the base that evening, my car came to the main gate, and Lance Corporal Merrick was on watch. He saw the car. He knew whose it was, and I watched him render honors, correct and sharp, and as we pulled through, I saw a family ahead of us reach the gate and hand over a pass, and I saw Merrick take it, and, when it read clean, wave them through with a courtesy that had not been in him 3 weeks before. The process was working. The young man was working. The first face of the base was, once again, a good face. I thought about all the versions of myself that had passed through that gate. The 18-year-old with the pressed camis. The 21-year-old sergeant teaching a nervous private to verify. The 22-year-old who left as an enlisted Marine and promised an old man she would remember. The 52-year-old in an ordinary car turned away, holding her temper because she understood that her anger was not really about the past. And now this last one, in dress blues, driving out through a gate that ran on the lesson she was given at that very spot. They were all the same person, and the gate had watched every one of them, patient as ground always is, keeping the record even when the machines and the men forgot it. Kerrigan died the following spring, peacefully, an old Marine in his own bed. And I was there for it, and one of the last things he said to me was about the gate. He said he was glad he had lived long enough to see it come full circle. I told him the circle was his. He had drawn it at 0500 in 1992, in the fog, with one sentence, and all I had ever done was refuse to let it break. I want to leave you with the thing I understood, sitting in my car that first night with 2 halves of a torn pass on my desk, though it took me all of this to be able to say it plainly. A torn pass cannot take your dignity. A broken machine cannot take it. A careless man at a warm desk cannot take it, and neither can a frightened boy at a gate. The only person who can ever hand over your dignity is you. In the moment you decide that what someone else thinks you are is the truth of what you are. I stood at that gate at 18 with nothing but a clipboard and a flashlight and a lesson. And I stood at it at 52 with a star on my shoulder. And in between I was turned away from my own home by a young Marine who had never heard my name. And not once, in any of it, did I hand anyone my dignity. I have never once done that. Neither should you, because the truest kind of standing, the kind that matters, is not the kind that gets you through a gate. It is the kind no one at a gate can ever revoke. Guard that. It is the one thing that was always yours. If you have ever stood on the wrong side of a gate you once guarded, or watched someone in charge choose the easy thing over the right thing, I would love to hear about it in the comments. Would you have made an example of that young Marine, or would you have fixed the gate the way I tried to? And have you ever carried a mentor's voice with you for years, the way I still hear Master Gunnery Sergeant Kerrigan telling me to verify and never assume? Tell me about the person who taught you that. I read every comment, If this story meant something to you, hit subscribe and stay a while.